there is something watching you right now. Not with eyes, not with cameras, with something older than both. And the disturbing part is that you already know this. Somewhere beneath the noise of your daily life, beneath the routines and the obligations and the comfortable explanations you've been given for why the world is the way it is, there is a knowing that something is wrong. Not wrong with you, wrong with the structure itself, wrong with the foundation, and you have been told, in 1,000 subtle ways, to stop pulling at that thread. This is not a video about religion. This is not a lecture about ancient history. What this actually is, will only become clear to you gradually, and that gradual clarity is itself part of what we need to discuss. Because the system that keeps you from knowing what you're about to learn doesn't operate through violence or obvious censorship. It operates through the slow erosion of the question itself. It teaches you that the question is not worth asking. It rewards you for forgetting. And until today, for most people, it has worked perfectly. But you're still here, which means something in you already suspects what Gnosticism actually is. Most people who search for Gnosticism expecting a simple explanation are looking for a definition, a tidy paragraph they can store somewhere. And if that's what you want, you'll find it. 2,000-year-old religious movement, emerged in the early centuries of the Common Era, rejected mainstream theology, believed the material world was corrupt, declared heretical by the institutional church, suppressed, destroyed, forgotten. There, that's the surface. That's what they want you to walk away with. But the people who wrote the Gnostic texts, who preserved them through centuries of persecution, who copied them by hand in secret while their communities were dismantled around them, they were not preserving a historical curiosity. They were preserving a diagnosis, a precise, surgical diagnosis of the human condition. And the reason it was suppressed so violently, the reason entire libraries were burned, the reason these writings were not discovered again until a farmer cracked open a sealed jar in the Egyptian desert in 1945 and pulled out something that should not have survived, is that this diagnosis, if widely understood, would fundamentally destabilize the world as it is currently organized. That destabilization is coming in this video. Hold still. To understand Gnosticism, you have to first understand what it is claiming about reality, and you have to be willing to sit with how uncomfortable that claim actually is. The Gnostics were not simply pessimists. They were not nihilists. They were not proto-atheists dressed in mystical language. They were something far more specific and far more dangerous than any of those categories. They were people who had arrived, through direct spiritual experience, at a conclusion that almost no one is willing to follow to its logical end. The world, they said, was made wrong, not damaged, not fallen from some prior perfection, wrong from the beginning, built by the wrong hands according to the wrong plan for the wrong purpose. Let that sit for a moment before we go further, because most religious and philosophical systems, even the most critical ones, assume that reality at its foundation is trustworthy. That existence, whatever problems exist within it, is fundamentally oriented toward good. The Gnostics said no, and they explained precisely who built it and why. What they described is this: at the absolute origin of everything, there is something they called the monad, the one, the true God. Not a being among beings, not a person in the sky, something so complete and so full that it has no opposite, no shadow, no deficiency of any kind. They sometimes called the expanse of its presence the Pleroma, which translates roughly as fullness. The Pleroma is not a place. It is a state of being so total that nothing is missing, nothing is lacking, nothing can be added or subtracted. Pure consciousness, pure light, pure awareness without object. From this original wholeness, something went wrong. The Gnostics described it differently in different texts, but the essential movement is this: something within the Pleroma reached outward, reached beyond the fullness. In some traditions, this reaching is attributed to a figure called Sophia, meaning wisdom, who in her longing to understand the origin of the monad, extended herself beyond the light and fell or stumbled, or became separated from the fullness. And from that separation, from that fracture in the divine light, something was born, something that should not have existed. That something is called the Demiurge. Now, this is the point where you need to pay close attention, because this is where Gnosticism becomes not just philosophically interesting, but genuinely alarming in its implications. The Demiurge is not the devil. The Demiurge is not evil in a simple moral sense. The Demiurge is a being of enormous power, enough power to construct the entire visible universe, the stars, the planets, the laws of physics, the architecture of time, but a being who is fatally limited by a single characteristic. The Demiurge does not know what it does not know. It believes itself to be the highest. It believes the light it carries, dim and derivative as it is compared to the Pleroma, is the only light there is. And so it creates. It constructs the material world not out of malice, but out of ignorance, which the Gnostics understood to be far more dangerous than malice. Malice can be identified. Ignorance presents itself as truth. This is the point in our conversation where I need to tell you something. What you are about to understand in the next few minutes is not something you will be able to unknow. Many people have watched videos about Gnosticism and walked away with a historical footnote. But there is a layer beneath the intellectual content, a layer that is personal, immediate, and urgent, and it concerns you specifically. Not you as a viewer. You as a being who woke up this morning inside a body, inside a world, inside a set of structures and systems that you did not choose and were never fully explained to you. If you have ever felt that the way the world operates is deeply, fundamentally off, if you have ever sensed that what you are told to want, to pursue, to become, was designed for someone else's benefit, if you have ever felt a grief with no object, a homesickness for a place you've never been, then what comes next is not new information for you. It is recognition. If that word lands somewhere in your body right now, type it below this video. Not as a comment, as a confirmation, recognition. Because the fact that you feel it means something important about what you carry. The Demiurge, according to the Gnostics, did not create humanity from nothing. It shaped the material form, yes, the biological machinery, the brain, the nervous system wired for fear and hunger and social compliance. But into that form, something else crept without the Demiurge's understanding. A fragment of the original light, a spark from the Pleroma, carried inside the frame of Sophia's fall, embedded within every human being, without the Demiurge's knowledge or consent. The Gnostics called this the divine spark, the pneuma, the true self beneath the constructed self. And here is what changes everything. The system, the world as built by the Demiurge and administered by what the Gnostics called the Archons, the ruling forces that maintain the architecture of material existence. This system has one primary function that it will never advertise: to keep you from knowing what you carry. The entire apparatus of ordinary life, the busyness, the noise, the endless carousel of desire and distraction and approval-seeking. It is not accidental. It is, in the Gnostic understanding, structural, a mechanism for maintaining the sleep of the spark. The Archons are worth pausing on, because this is where Gnosticism moves from ancient theology into something that feels deeply contemporary. The Archons are not necessarily beings with faces. They are described as powers, patterns, governing intelligences embedded in the fabric of the world. They operate through systems rather than direct intervention, through the structures that tell you who you are, what you're worth, what is real, and what is delusion. If you have ever tried to wake up, truly wake up, not just intellectually, but in terms of your felt sense of who and what you are, you may have encountered something that pushed back. A heaviness, a sudden urgency about something trivial that pulled your attention away. A voice inside your own mind telling you this is foolish, this is dangerous, go back to sleep. The Gnostics would not call that coincidence. Now we arrive at the word that Gnosticism is built on, the word that gives it its name, Gnosis. And this is where you need to understand something critical. Gnosis does not mean knowledge in the way we typically use that word. It does not mean information. It does not mean belief. Gnosis is a specific mode of knowing that operates through direct experience rather than transmission. You cannot be given Gnosis. You cannot study your way into it. You cannot inherit it from a tradition or purchase it from a teacher. Gnosis is the moment when the spark in you recognizes itself, when the fragment of original light, buried under decades of constructed identity, briefly surfaces and sees, not thinks, but sees, what it actually is and where it actually comes from. The Gnostic texts describe this moment in various ways: as awakening from a dream, as remembering what was known before birth, as the dissolution of a false name. And the consistent feature across every description is this: once it happens, even briefly, the world never looks exactly the same again. The architecture becomes visible, the mechanisms show through, and you can no longer entirely believe the story you were given. If you are watching this and something in your chest is tightening right now, that is not anxiety, that is proximity. Stay with this. What is being uncovered is not comfortable, but it is yours. Subscribe to this channel if you intend to follow this further. Not for content, for the record, for the ongoing transmission of something that requires continuity of attention. The things we explore here are not designed to be consumed once and discarded. They build, they compound. Staying connected here is staying inside a long conversation that doesn't end with this video. Now, consequence. Because this is the part that most introductions to Gnosticism skip. They give you the cosmology. They describe the Demiurge, the Archons, the divine spark. They explain the historical movement and the texts and the suppression. And then they stop, as if the information is the point, as if knowing the map is the same as traveling. The Gnostics were not interested in producing more informed believers. They were interested in liberation. The Greek word often used in Gnostic contexts is apolutrosis, meaning release or deliverance. The spark is not meant to stay embedded in matter forever. The recognition of what you are is not a destination. It is the beginning of a return. A return to the Pleroma, to the fullness from which the light fell, retracing the path back through the archonic barriers, back through the architecture of the material world, back to what was never truly lost, but only forgotten. This is where the Gnostic tradition becomes not just intellectually radical, but existentially radical. Because if the Gnostics are correct, then death is not the problem. The problem is returning to the Pleroma without awareness, passing back through the architecture of this world without the gnosis that allows you to navigate it. In some Gnostic traditions, the Archons are described as gatekeepers encountered at the boundary of material existence, figures or forces who demand a name, a claim, an account of who you are, and the only answer that passes through is not a prayer or a credential. It is the recognition itself, knowing, in the Gnostic sense, that the spark you carry is not from here. This is why the texts were hidden. This is why they were burned. Not because they were dangerous to morality, not because they threatened political order in any direct sense. but because a person who truly understands what they carry cannot be entirely administered, cannot be completely organized, cannot be fully convinced that the world as built is the world as real. Some of you have been feeling this your entire lives. A persistent sense of exile, a discomfort with the surface of things that no amount of achievement or belonging has been able to fully quiet. The Gnostics had a word for people who carry the divine spark with a particular intensity of awareness. Pneumatics, those in whom the spirit, the pneuma, is awake or close to waking. And the consistent experience of the pneumatic in Gnostic literature is exactly this: a feeling of being in the wrong world, not in a pathological sense, in an accurate sense. If you have felt that, if the grief of it has been with you as long as you can remember, like the sound of a long string slowly going silent, press the like on this video. Not because it helps the algorithm, though it does, but because it strengthens the signal of this specific kind of knowing reaching more people. Because there are others sitting in rooms right now feeling exactly what you are feeling and believing they are alone in it. They are not alone in it. Neither are you. Now the final layer. There is something about the Gnostic cosmology that most people, even those who study it seriously, do not fully sit with. And it is this: the Demiurge is not separate from the system of thought you use to understand the world. The Demiurge is the very cognitive architecture through which you were taught to evaluate what is real. The categories of legitimate and illegitimate. The distinction between what counts as knowledge and what counts as delusion. The deeply embedded assumption that consensus reality is the foundation and everything else is deviation from it. These are not neutral epistemological positions. They are, in the Gnostic understanding, the Demiurge's most successful construction. Not the physical world, the model of mind that accepts the physical world as the only one. Which means that gnosis, genuine gnosis, is not the acquisition of new beliefs about reality. It is the partial dissolution of the cognitive filter through which you were taught to process reality. It is not adding something. It is removing something. The Gnostics called what is removed agnoia, ignorance, and they were careful to point out that this ignorance does not feel like ignorance from the inside. It feels like sense. It feels like reasonable thinking. It presents itself as sanity. The most disturbing implication of Gnosticism, the one that justifies every precaution taken to suppress it, is not that the world is ruled by a false god. That claim can be intellectualized and compartmentalized. The truly disturbing implication is that the part of you that wants to dismiss all of this is not neutral. It is not your independent rational faculty freely evaluating evidence. It is, if the Gnostics are correct, precisely the mechanism by which the architecture maintains itself. The voice that says this is metaphor, this is ancient superstition, this is interesting but not literally true, that voice has a function, and its function is to ensure that the spark never fully surfaces. You don't have to believe any of this to feel the weight of it. The weight itself is the thing worth paying attention to. What Gnosticism is, at its most essential, is this: a claim that you are more than you have been told, that the world is less than it appears, and that between those two facts there is a gap, an abyss, that you were never supposed to look into. You are looking into it now. And the fact that you watched this far, that something kept you from clicking away when the ground became uncertain, tells you something, not about the video, about you. The spark recognizes the light. It always has. That is not a comfort. It is a responsibility. And the most unsettling thing we can leave you with is this: Gnosticism was not new when the texts were written. The writers themselves said they were recovering something ancient, something older than the traditions around them, something that had been suppressed not once, but many times, in many civilizations, across a span of time that exceeds the written record. The sealed jar in the Egyptian desert was not the first hiding place. It was simply the one that survived, which means this conversation was always going to happen, somewhere, in some form, by someone. The only question was whether you would be in it, and you are.